kind of this new discipline that can really create this whole new like capability for a company. So yeah, I think we're still just seeing the beginning of that, where design plus other things and being able to be more expansive in your area of impact is like where a lot of designers might go.
Welcome to Growth Mates, the place to connect with inspiring leaders to help you grow yourself and your product. Here you can learn how companies like Dropbox, Adobe, Amplitude, Canva, and many more are building excellent products and growth culture. Please press follow to support us and get new episodes. This time I talked to David Hoang, a VP of Design and Marketing at Replit, previously Head of Design at Weblow. David currently is an executive focused on design, marketing, and growth. Sounds like a dream job. We started our discussion from nonlinear career trajectories and how David combines all these disciplines as an executive. Then we talked about the importance of design in the future of product-led growth and how to leverage templates for growth with some examples from Webflow, and finally how to align the whole company around quality. I loved how David emphasized the need to prioritize craft for product growth. I hope that by the end of this episode, you will feel the same way and will take away some inspiration on building a non-linear career and advice to uplift the quality bar for a product. If you find this show valuable, please share it with one of your colleagues or friends. It gives huge support to continue creating it. To receive all episodes right in your inbox, subscribe to katesuma.substack.com. With that, let's dive in after a short announcement. This episode is brought to you by Appcues, the platform that helps you design, deploy, and test captivating onboarding experiences in minutes, not weeks. Appcues created the Product Adoption Academy, which includes courses, templates, and examples to help you level up your product adoption, and you can use it entirely for free. Check out the 5-step growth flow review template, which I created to help companies connect growth hypotheses with behavioral patterns to uncover meaningful improvements. Find an example of Dropbox onboarding inside and use this template to review any growth flows in your product. Get the template through the link appcues.com/growthmates. appcues.com/growthmates. Hello, David. Welcome to Growth Mates. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. My pleasure. I've been following you, I think, for several years and seen your face here and there. And I think you have such a non-traditional career trajectory from head of design in companies like Webflow, General Assembly, One Medical. You shifted to become an advisor and angel investor, and then ended up being VP of Design and Marketing at Replit. And probably you're the only person I know from the market with this title. And I'm very curious to learn more. What led you to become a professional on this intersection of both design and marketing? Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, for sure. I think the thing I always tell people, with nonlinear careers, like a lot of this isn't planned, right? Like I never thought in my career that's like, I want to be a VP of marketing and design at a software creation platform. It's just one of those things where you have to kind of just really introduce some serendipity into your career and just have an open mind where things go. But for me, a lot of it was I've always been really connected and fascinated with like creator tools or any sort of type of work that has some type of impact and empowerment. So for example, Webflow and Replit have both common missions where it's about like access for people to build, websites and software. One Medical, a lot of that was access to healthcare for a lot of people. But yeah, honestly, I think, like when people ask, like, how did you end up here? I think the honest answer is like, it wasn't planned, right? It was just kind of something as you kind of go through your career, there's people you meet, there's opportunities that come up. And, and I think that's why I always recommend to people have an open mind about it too. Cause I can tell you like, marketing was not something that I had aspirations to do in my career, but through many different moments in my career, I was able to gain marketing experience. And, when the opportunity came up at Replit, it was really good timing to take that on. So for example, I worked at HTC for a year running global digital marketing and doing design there. I was like really nervous because I was like, I don't know if I want to do marketing because now I can't get a product design job after this, right? But it really was really good experience in my career that needed to help me kind of even prepare for the role that I have now.
Amazing. That sounds like very, very interesting. And the thing that you said you didn't plan that resonates a lot, because I think I was reflecting on my journey as well and realized that before this moment, it was very well planned overall. And now as I opened up to like this independent trajectory, I think that was the moment when I started more like oriented around my aspirations rather than traditional paths that exist on the market. So I think the role that you ended up with, VP of Marketing and Design, is also something that was designed by you probably, or like designed and customized for this moment. And this is not a typical trajectory yet, but who knows, maybe at some point it will become one of the interesting trajectories for also design specialists. But maybe just to make a pause here and dive in deeper into your job as a VP of Design and Marketing today, what is the core of that? What are you doing actually on this intersection? What are your day-to-day like responsibilities? How does it look like?
And as you mentioned, Kate, I think I agree with you. Like, there's very few people I know who have the responsibility of both like design and marketing. In fact, like if I go on LinkedIn, I can probably count the ones I know like on one hand. For Replit, within design is product design and user research. And on marketing side, it's growth marketing, brand, and also DevRel too, which is like a huge part for developer tools. And, ultimately, the thing that's interesting is you think these two departments are completely different things, because I think in organizations, they're usually separate, right? Like there's sales and marketing belongs there, and then R&D where the EPD team is. But in a lot of ways too, it's not that different, because I think, when we talk about marketing and design, it really comes down to customer experience, right? And like just delivering value to the customers, understanding their needs, getting feedback. And wow, that sounds like a design team, right? And I think that's the thing, with marketing and the way I run marketing at Replit is that, for me, there's so many different flavors of marketing. You can be very metrics driven. You can come from a performance marketing background or brand. There's no one type of marketing leader. So the way I just kind of looked at it, when this opportunity was presented, I was just like, approach it the way I know best, which is from like a design approach and really understanding that. So in that core day to day, like running the teams, they have their separate rituals and work with embedded teams just as others. But then we try to take this uniqueness of having design and marketing being the same org to really focus on like customer journeys and customer experience.
Fantastic. It reminded me about the concept of Airbnb, if you remember, the fact that product managers were also sort of very connected to product marketing. And in order to be a successful product manager, you have to be specialized in product marketing as well, because you have to deliver the story to the customer. And I think as designers, like people are also designing the stories through the experiences, and this combination of skills and packaging the experience well, understanding how to onboard users well into that experience might be good. Just combination of knowledge. And to be honest, today, I feel like I'm doing marketing more than I ever done it. Some people even told me that, Kate, it seems like you're quite specialized in marketing. Can you tell us how are you doing that, this content strategy and things like that? And I'm like, I'm not a marketer. I have never been specialized in that, but it's so natural. Probably also from both of us, we have this background in growth and product-led growth functions. So probably that has some intersections. But before jumping into this topic of design and product-led growth that we will talk about today, I wanted to ask you, there are any other non-linear career trajectories that you observed for people with design backgrounds based on your network or overall like connections? What are some other interesting trajectories that you've seen beyond VP of Design plus Marketing, maybe something else?
Yeah, it's interesting. I say this a lot to people, and I think it's a good thing. When I say it to people, I think they might think of it as negative, but not everyone is going to be a chief design officer, right? And not everyone wants to be, for that matter, too. I think people find impact and value and purpose in different ways. So what does that mean for people with the design background, right? I think there's a couple of approaches. I think one is like kind of the path I'm in right now. Who knows, that could change in the future, but kind of design and. There's a lot of people who are heads of design and product, maybe, or head of design and research in some of that capacity. And it's really expanding the value that the design background offers in certain aspects of the company. I've seen a lot of designers recently too, in the midst that everything's going on in the market, they're starting to become founders too, and really exploring that path of what does that look like for a designer to be that founder at the company. Like there's very few even today that you can kind of say like these are founders that come from design background. Obviously Brian Chesky being the most famous one right now, but there's still few and far between many of those too. I've seen a lot of designers, they've moved on to become a general manager or become a COO too, just because of that background and understanding the business. They actually kind of moved more to that too. And I kind of see this as like a good thing too. Again, this is like when I tell people this is a bad thing, it doesn't mean that design has less of representation in the work, right? But it's that design is kind of moving to these different areas of the business or the product or starting new businesses and products. They're applying that value design to those areas too. And that's really positive. And we're still going to have this chief design officers and like design leaders who can scale companies too. So even if it feels like there's less, it's actually, we're diversifying where like design impact is happening.
Fantastic. It really reminded me about the idea of, collecting different trajectories and inviting people who represent different trajectories to this podcast. We already had Phil, who is a co-founder of Dopt and previously head of growth product design at Dropbox. We have you today. We had Erica, who is VP of design and research at SurveyMonkey. So we have these different examples of leaders who basically lead on this intersection. I can imagine if I would continue my corporate path, I would probably end up on the intersection of design and product management. It was always my sort of identity, something in between these two disciplines in product-led growth. So, and it really shows the non-linear trajectories beyond just a regular managerial path or craft path where you go to become like IC staff, principal designer, that you can explore paths in between and just design your role in different intersections. And also maybe design and engineering is another one that we didn't mention, because I've seen so many people who are great builders, who are like amazing in both sides, and usually they go and build their own product and start a company.
I think that design engineer title is really popular right now. I think it's, especially in the age of like generative AI and these types of toolings, like having design plus that technical acumen, I think is going to be like pretty rare. I kind of describe the design engineer in the 2020s, kind of like in the 2010s when everyone wanted a data scientist, right? It's kind of this new discipline that can really create this whole new like capability for a company. So yeah, I think we're still just seeing the beginning of that, where design plus other things and being able to be more expansive in your area of impact is like where a lot of designers might go.
Amazing. Love it. I just want to move forward to the topic that should be the core of our discussion today. It was sort of the statement from your amazing proof of concept newsletter when you wrote the article, Why Design is the Future of PLG. And that really captured my attention. And I read it several times. And I think it resonates a lot with my personal philosophy, maybe, and also the intersection of these two disciplines. So I would love to talk more about that. So one of the things that you've mentioned there, that more people from a design background will not only contribute to self-serve motion and PLG, but become owners of it. I assume it's also connected to this idea of nonlinear career that we just discussed, and the fact that design people with business background can really drive product growth. But what was your thinking behind that prediction, if we can say it's a prediction?
Yeah, for me, growth is one of those functions and disciplines I've had the pleasure of leading for a long time and have really a strong respect for the craft. And I think as I learned more just in my career, like what growth is, I think growth is always that stigma of just like growth at all costs, and you're A/B testing with all these dark patterns and you're trying to make as much revenue as possible. And that's just false, right? Like, in fact, that's just like bad growth design for teams who know what they're doing. And I think the more I spent time with great product growth leaders, great growth design leaders, just kind of realized like the things that make up PLG is customer experience, design, and research, right? Really understanding what are the moments that like someone realizes the value of what you're trying to sell them. How do they kind of navigate that on their own? What are some of the friction points they run into? And I've seen a lot of things we always need to kind of solve on a growth team is those are the kind of the foundations of like building out a growth practice too, is just design, research. And a lot of it does kind of start from qualitative, right? I think everyone thinks it's quantitative from the start, but let's be real. Like any place you go, like anyone who's had to establish a growth team knows that at first the data's messy, right? You have to think about like the funnel as well too. So a lot of the natural foundations of growth really starts with things we learned in our craft as designers. So that's what I mean by I think the future of PLG is not just like designers contributing to it, but also leading it because of the expertise that we have. Just our experiences of just seeing the customer journey can really provide so much value for the business where, you know, a lot of the hypotheses and experiments that we might think about really comes from like a design-led approach.
That's interesting that you also wrote in your article something about verticalization of design and how PLG probably reminds us to think of end-to-end experiences, because traditionally, and based on my experience from Mira, product-led growth teams like acquisition, activation, engagement, or even some vertical teams, they are thinking of flows rather than features, let's say. And it's very difficult to just focus on one particular part of the product because growth flow touches all parts of the product. And maybe this is something that in terms of approach and how to organize the company is an interesting concept and interesting lens, not to think only about the verticals, but also think of this horizontal glue in between them. And maybe product-led growth function is that glue. What do you think about that? Or what do you think are the challenges with that? Because I can name many challenges because of that. If you're that intersection and if you're that glue, then you need to collaborate with so many functions and also deliver the experience with the high speed. It might be quite challenging. Maybe some examples come to mind from your experience at Webflow and other companies.
I think, you know, I was talking to a couple of design leaders recently about how design is organized. And I think a lot of times it's organized by either surface area or kind of some of the embedded teams. So, you know, in a lot of ways, it's kind of strange where, and this is what I mean by the verticalization in design. Like at some point, we kind of got to over-indexing. That's like you have this EPD team. They need to make sure there's a dedicated designer to be able to kind of help on this work, right? And I'm not saying that's bad. That's actually like really important. But I think the things we kind of forget to invest in is more of like the end-to-end experiences, right? So for me, a lot of growth teams that I've worked on and led, I've always kind of pushed like we should be thinking omni-channel. We should think about multi-surface and start with the top of funnel with marketing. And you know this, like there's no one flavor of growth teams, right? There's dotted line, embedded, what's the right one? It continues to change. But I think that horizontal focus and emphasis is really important to kind of understand how does someone, because PLG is not just see, try, buy, right? It's like see, try, buy, and then especially if my experience at Webflow and Replit, right, where it's a creator tool and there's like infinite jobs to be done. It's like see, try, buy, and then they come into this experience and a bunch of stuff happens, right? And how do you make sense of that? Like there's infinite paths that people can kind of find. What I like to say, like the aha moment could also be the nah moment for people. So for like one person who really understands this path is going to work really well. But for other people, they might run into that as a challenge. And I think that's where like growth. And at Webflow, you know, we call this our team, the lifecycle team, was thinking about this end-to-end experience to be like, okay, what does the journey look like for someone trying to build a blog, or they're a freelancer running an agency, or it's a corporate website. These journeys look a lot different. So, as you kind of growth a little bit more horizontal, it helps you really work with the other teams to be like, well, what does activation and continuous engagement look like, and really understand like what are the things that can help set them up for success, right? Growth is not just sign up and onboarding.
Absolutely. And it's interesting, maybe from your experience at Webflow, the growth team was owning certain flows and components of that flow, or they had to interact deeply with the core team who was owning these small verticals. Let's say, imagining a builder experience, as Webflow is like basically website builder. And activation flow is very, very connected to this first experience of building your website. And imagining that the actual leverage for growth and for activation is something within the core experience. That is most common situation, that we need to change something within the builder itself, not just putting an additional pop-up here to explain how to work with that. And imagining that would be the problem to solve. So would growth team solve that problem, or they would have to delegate some parts to core, divide responsibilities, do it together? How is it?
So yeah, this is a common thing. The lifecycle team worked a lot with our core experience team at Webflow, what we called capabilities. And a lot of this is a shared initiative, right? So as you kind of mentioned, Kate, it's like, yeah, there are some things like you cannot solve growth by tool tips and onboarding videos. At some point, there's some foundational aspect of the product that needs to get improved, or some friction people run into. How do you learn as much as possible in order to like provide other teams the insights of what are some things that, we can do from a product experience to set people up for success? So during my time there, we did a lot of research. So one of the things we did was a big diary study, just kind of focusing on like, what is that journey for someone building in Webflow? And again, I think when you think about growth, you have to think about what is like an appropriate amount of like weekly active use. So Webflow, the amount of times people return to use it on a weekly basis is a lot different than like a consumer app that you might check every day, right? Like an Instagram or something. So the type of daily engagement is going to be really different. And I think it's less about like thinking about the number of engagement, but more around like what are the key touch points. What we wanted to learn at Webflow was really understanding like, okay, on the first time sign up, what is that level of achievement we expect someone to kind of know from their first session, right? Is it really understanding the product, being able to publish something and see what they're going to look at? What does that follow-up look like, right? It's the same with Replit too. It's like activation for these types of creator tools take different time, and a lot of it might happen off product as well too. Maybe it's really routing them to educational content to learn about some of these concepts and then come back and apply to that. So, we did a lot of research and prototyping during our time at Webflow to then work with that, some of the other product pillars to help give them the best insight as possible. For example, the biggest challenge, I bet to this day, for a lot of people who use Webflow is really comprehension of understanding layout, right? So if you're a front-end developer, you might be really familiar with Flexbox, Grid, some of these other things. But what we saw a lot is if someone, let's say you're a designer that you're more used to like Figma, something being frame-based and have a lot of more of that free-form absolute positioning control, you might go into Webflow and just start clicking a bunch of buttons and just hope that it works. So we did a lot of sessions on like, are there different features or things we can kind of deliver for people to make that layout comprehension easier? And, there's two features that kind of came out of this. One is, it's a quick layout. It's more of like a stack-based layout control that, someone who just needs a certain level of control can do that confidently and be set up for success. But if you're like an advanced power user and you understand that, you can still start from scratch. This with your time at Miro, like templates is like, and then, the other feature that we launched was called libraries, which is these pre-built layouts that, we ended up building ecosystem and marketplace around it for people to like quite literally drag and drop some of these components that they want to be able to get the site that they built. So, a lot of that was derived from some of the insights that the lifecycle team shared just from these conversations with customers that then got, trickled throughout like the product experience. And, we were able to collaborate on that with other pillars.
Well, I love that we dove into these examples, and I see a lot of interconnections with my experience at Miro because probably the product, they have some similarities. So you mentioned that for some group of users, you had this simplified experience, probably for non-tech savvy people, and for more advanced, you had more interest in more advanced capabilities. And it's about personalization that we always try to say that it's important to make your flows personalized. And that's where templates, just to also share with our audience and listeners who might be experimenting with them, that this is so powerful component of the product that can be leveraged for acquisition, for example. If you have a good library of templates, you can use your SEO strategy to just create good descriptions, keywords, so your customers will find relevant templates. Then you onboard them to these relevant journeys, activate them through this template. Some templates can be even a pillar for monetization. I don't know if you use that strategy at the Webflow, by the way. I remember you probably had some paid templates. I've been researching your library some time ago, and for me, that was something interesting, actually, that to leverage this, probably even user-generated content, right? So your user-generated become paid templates, right? So I remember I was talking to your product leader, probably from Webflow some time ago, about that. It's interesting that you ended up monetizing template. It's a good growth leverage, but a lot of companies probably are afraid of that for some reason, because it's like difficult to implement, and it's probably difficult to understand the predictability of that component of the ARR and if it makes sense to invest in.
Yeah, I think with templating, I don't know if it was Bruno you talked to, but, he's our head of growth. Also, Melissa Tan was the one I worked closely with. But when we kind of looked at templates, it was really this flywheel with people being able to create the demand too, right? So there was a lot of people who are a lot of freelancers and service providers who wanted to build templates, and maybe the goal is to monetize or be able to demonstrate what they can kind of build in Replit. And, we kind of used our platform in our community as a way to kind of help people showcase their work. And like longer down the road, what that became was just like a huge amount of supply for a lot of these customers. Then, like, let's say in the enterprise or small business and mid-market, they're like, I want all these templates. And oh my goodness, like Webflow has all these templates that, for a number of years, these great community members created and built, whether the intent was to monetize or be able to kind of showcase their work. That's kind of what that moment was for libraries too. There's Reloom, which is like a awesome company that started building Webflow pre-built layouts like this too. So not like a rigid template, but these sort of building blocks that people want to be able to use and then customize. And we're like, oh my goodness, with the launch of the quick layout and, this libraries, it's like we realized there's this delivery mechanism to help the builders and also the people who want to use those templates too. So it's kind of this nice marketplace of mutual value.
I love when product leverages the communities and like create this community-led growth strategy. I think we will find a way to record a separate episode about that, because it's an absolute separate topic and there are so many interesting components of that. Anyways, what I was also thinking to talk to you about today is the other side of the contribution from the design function to growth is the quality and defining quality. And, our responsibility as, people with design background, whatever, founders, CDO or VP of design and marketing, probably one of our core responsibilities is to keep the quality standard and define the quality standard in the company. And you said in probably another article on proof of concept that companies talk a lot about quality and how important the quality is in their cultures. But the number one problem that you see is that they don't set the standard clearly to understand. And based on your experience, what can help companies define the quality principles and probably beyond that, just make them really actionable? Because it can live on paper, of course, and can be clearly defined, but how to make sure they are actionable?
It's one of the hardest things, right? I think defining craft and quality, like it's easy for everyone to say, I care about quality. And then when you kind of ask people like, what do you mean by that? Most people don't have a strong answer of what that means, right? It's kind of this catch-all that like, we want everything to be good and amazing. It's like, oh, that's great. I want that too. But the more you can kind of take something very subjective like quality and make it as objective as possible of what you mean by that in order to help align teams on what's important, right? So does quality mean performance on load times? Does it mean all of the buttons have a very nice, elegant border radius and it's consistent across the entire system? What do we mean? And I think what's important for teams is everyone needs a way to kind of prioritize what's most important. So that's what I mean by kind of defining what quality means. And it could shift based on like the current problems that the teams are facing. Maybe it is speed and reliability. And that's kind of what you mean by quality. It's just like, we need to make the product work. We need to make it load and perform there and then kind of polish stuff. So I think that's something that we should always emphasize with our teams of like, hey, when we talk about craft and quality, let's give examples of like what good looks like, whether it's in your own product experience or someone else's, just to kind of almost like mood board, like these are great signals of quality we want to strive for. And then like really give people specifics on like, you know, where in the product experience is quality really good or where is it suffering? So we can really concentrate our efforts on that. I think one of the biggest misconceptions, or it might be true, I don't know. I'd be curious what your take is, but I think the number one thing with growth designers that they have a stigma against is people think they don't care about quality. And the reason is because I think with growth, if people don't understand the different types of experimentation methods, there's always this like, oh, we can follow up later because it's like a fast growth experiment. We don't have to worry about this quality, this piece of UI, or this copy. But I do think it's important for growth designers, especially to kind of hold that standard that we care about quality, right? And where does that along the funnels and the different experiments, what's our threshold for that, right? So do we care about quality? You know, if the sample set's like just 5% of the audience, what if 5% of the audience is like 5 million people? You know, like how do you kind of quantify like what you're comfortable with making a trade-off? So I think that's something, you know, I always encourage growth teams too. It's like, look, we should really treat the design as if this is going to GA and then like start there. And then you can always kind of make the trade-off versus having the behavior being like, we're going to just iterate and make it better later down the road, because what usually happens is you don't. So I think that's the thing, especially with growth designers too, to really kind of be a leader in quality and making sure that, you know, part of the reasons we're testing this is to ensure quality as well too. So that's kind of like maybe my take with like the stigma. I think again, growth designers, like there's so many stereotypes that we have to work through. And I think one is like, yeah, they'll just like A/B test things and not care about the quality and really focus that, but we really should.
Absolutely, 100%. And in order to break that misunderstanding, I even wrote an article some time ago that I just took a look at good products and their growth flows, because I probably assume that some flows in the product, like onboarding experience, were designed by growth teams. And the products were like Canva, Figma, Notion, Linear, interesting products, very good quality focus, and just unpack their onboarding journeys. And I didn't find any dark patterns, you know, any bad experiences, anything like that, just to show how they are well documented, by the way, quality principles that can be found online are represented within the growth flows as well. So this is one of the things, as an example, is some sort of inspiration. Another one that comes to mind is that there should be some non-negotiable quality principles that, as you said, like imagining that we are just creating the experience for GA and then we are trying to decompose it. And if we are making a decision on a possible trade-off, I would advise to cut the scope rather than the quality. So we can cut the complexity of the feature that we release for the first time just to explore an experiment, maybe just to understand and validate the hypothesis, but we shouldn't trade off the quality aspect. So less is more. So we can launch a part of that experience first, for example, but with high quality rather than
It's always easy to cut scope versus try to tack on quality.
Rather than we deliver everything end to end yet. And it's easier, but sometimes it's not the path and it's not the mental model that teams are following probably. And in terms of non-negotiable principles, I think it's easy to put them on paper, but it's hard to make them actionable. And in order to make them actionable, the design reviews, the product reviews, the OKRs reviews, all of these review sessions are designed or created in order to share opinionated feedback using these principles from leadership, from other teams, from peers. And then it becomes a DNA of the company, when, let's say, there is a principle of avoiding local optimizations and designing consistent experiences. So if everybody knows that and can use this in opinionated feedback, then it becomes sort of norm in the company and just a collaboration norm. In growth, if we take that discipline as an example, what I've noticed is that just the concept or mentality is to treat everything as a quick win. And then, this understanding about growth leads to that sacrifices of the quality. So we should design it faster. We should ship it faster. We should validate it faster. It's a quick win. However, it's not like that. There are things that will never be a quick win. So, for example, sharing experience and permissions, I would never treat that area as a quick win area. It's so complex, and any wrong thing designed there can lead to so many problems in the long term. So there are certain areas where it shouldn't be treated as a quick win, and their quality standards are even higher as a basis.
Patrick Collison at Stripe talks a lot about this when he describes API design, where it should be well considered and think about the scale and architecture because it's going to be long lasting beyond the developers who built it, right? And I think to your point, there's some things that, they can't be quick wins and they kind of have to be just some of these foundational considerations. And I think that's the thing about growth design people get wrong a lot too, is that a lot of it is building strong foundations to be able to run experiments and do these things, right? Like data reporting and thinking about some of those things. Those are not necessarily quick wins. You want to be kind of thoughtful about how you instrument and measure some of these things too. So yeah, there's a time and place for that, but really upholding the quality. It's always easier to cut scope with something high quality versus trying to tack on quality to make something bad better.
Totally. And as a design leader in many companies, did you have a chance to define these quality standards? So I don't know, from the perspective of even operationalizing them somehow, if you did, what were your steps towards that?
Yeah, I think a lot of it too is just really taking the time to define what your design principles and quality standards are. And yes, a lot of this is important in documentation and writing some of that. But I would say the thing I've learned is where it shows up is in crit, right? And design reviews and being able to talk about, hey, is this kind of reaching the quality bar? How do we define it? And you have those conversations with other designers. You do it with cross-functional teams for product and engineering to understand hey, what is that bar of standard of something that we are comfortable shipping? That is the thing that I think it's important. It's even in my career as a designer, which has been a very long time now, I think the most sacred meeting is design crit, to be able to talk about that, discuss why, so we have a shared understanding. And then you kind of capture what's being discussed in that and share that more outwardly as kind of a reminder to scale. But I think that's the thing is crit, it should be a rigorous thing. This should be a safe space, but it also should be a space of having really candid conversations about what we mean by quality. And it's not the criticism of anyone's work, because in the end, when you're a design team, you're responsible for every pixel that's shipped, right? You're a design leader. Every pixel shipped, not designed by you, is still your responsibility for that. So that's the type of mindset, I think design teams should have, is we share the collective quality of the product experience.
And I would add, it's the responsibility of everyone in the company, of every product manager, of engineering person, whatever we ship to end users is our shared responsibility. And I think what I would also add, when it goes beyond the design grid, how to align the whole company around these standards. And then it becomes really tricky, because some functions are less educated about user experience overall. And then this is the component of educating other functions, what quality means, what is good, what is not good, what is a good design pattern, what is a good user experience. And what I think overall helped based on my experiences to sharing this concept beyond the design function, like go into product functions, go into all hands sessions, sharing the concept, sharing these ideas, using this vocabulary. And also maybe for a bigger companies, what might help is using the quality as a lens to measure the performance, even like not only designers, but the team's performance, understanding if the team is focused on the high quality, if they are all collectively shipping high quality, it means that everybody in the team caring about that, understanding the standards, and it can become one of the, not everything, but one of the criteria for the understanding the performance and measuring the individual performance. But the first step is definitely defining what it means. Without that, it will be very, very tough to scale it further, definitely.
What you described reminds me of a couple ex-Apple people I've worked with where they kind of said, like, you know, when it comes to the quality and the brand of Apple, they always said even the security guard knew if something was off-brand. And it's because of how you share that with the rest of the company. And to your point, you know, it's important for design to kind of help define the standard of the quality, but everyone at the company to know like what's important as well, too. Like throughout like the entire like customer life cycle.
Absolutely. And we mentioned so many products and companies already who are like implementing high quality, who are executing towards high quality. Anything else comes to your mind? Just also probably it's like shifting a little bit to this lightning round in the end. Any other products that come to your mind who have this understanding of quality and who really execute towards that understanding?
Yeah, I think for me, the ones you described, right, mentioned earlier, and especially Linear too, right? It's a company that design founder that really cares about the craft and quality, and they don't sacrifice shipping fast as part of it, right? But it's just something that is just kind of put in the forefront, and the way they kind of do onboarding, all the touch points of the experience, like they put a lot of care and consideration into that. So, you know, when I think of like a lot of these companies that I really admire, like Linear is definitely one at the top of that because of quality doesn't mean slowing shipping, right? It's just being more intentional about what you ship.
Amazing. Love it. And one of the secrets of Linear, I was like also reading a lot of things that their founder is sharing on LinkedIn and put some examples to this article about high quality. One of the secrets of that is also having a small team, but very, very experienced team. And maybe it's also one of the interesting ways of building the company these days. Let's keep the band small, but very, very professional and just very focused on the quality side. That was fantastic conversation. Thanks, David, a lot. We have a couple of minutes for the lightning round. Let's maybe, as the topic of high quality is still fresh, we can think about maybe one quality principle that you used at your product work. And if you have an example to share, that would be also nice.
Yeah, I have a couple kind of design principles that inspire my philosophy on design. And I think one, as it pertains to quality, is iteration over perfectionism. And I know that sounds kind of contradictory to quality because I think a lot of people think quality is perfectionism. But I think the number one way to increase quality or to be more productive is to reduce the iteration cycle. So I'd rather have people on my teams start with something really rough, right? Even if it's like hot gluing UI together in a prototype or something, just to kind of like start looking at that first function and that first experience and polish it over time. Because I think if you try to get it perfect in the first go, there's so many things that are missing in the consideration of the experience itself. So I'd always rather see 12 iterations that progressively get better than one that you hope is like the perfect one.
Nice. Love this principle. And the iteration is like one of the words that I'm also using. I have another principle, which is probably about ways of working. It's called iterate smart. It's very hard to explain in a nutshell, but overall, the idea is that after any experiment that you launched, you have to analyze the results in different ways, both qual and quant side, to iterate next time based on that. Because sometimes the iterations are happening just for the sake of iterations without this informed element of like analyzing what actually happened, what went wrong, why it didn't work. So this is why iteration and smart iteration is something I also try to advocate for. Super. And another question on the lightning round, a typical question that I ask anyone here. Any books or resources that you'd recommend about the topics that we discussed today on the quality or business and design intersection that inspired you?
Oh, there's so many. Maybe a couple that come to mind. I think one book I really hold in high regard, it's probably behind me somewhere. Yeah, there's a couple above me. It's called The Humane Interface by Jeff Raskin, who's one of the engineers on the Macintosh. And I think, it's kind of the HCI version of the design of everyday things, just thinking about like what makes experience humane, what is the role of like human and computer. And I think in the age of AI, it's really amazing to see how those principles really hold today. As far as like business and growth, of course, one of my favorites is Lenny's newsletter too. Lenny Rachitsky, he is a big inspiration for me, not just in growth, but just kind of writing and sharing about that. So just really love some of the content he puts out and conversations with some of the growth leaders as well too. But yeah, I mean, for me, there's so many books to read and like not enough time, but Humane Interface is probably like the number one book I recommend to any software designer.
Amazing. I think nobody mentioned that book yet. It's, sometimes it's hard because so many people on the podcast mention amazing books, but this one I think have never appeared yet. So we will put this to the recommendations and the notes. And finally, our new lightning round question, because the Growth Mates is becoming also the community of these people, like-minded people on this intersection of product-led growth and high-quality user experience and leadership and things that I personally care about. Who would be 3 people who you would recommend to invite to this show?
Yeah, I think when I think of like the all-time greats in growth, I think of Chetna Deora. She has had a growth at, Coursera and Netflix, and so many other places. But as far as someone who really understands the business and also has like really strong design foundations too, I think anyone on the podcast, if you mention her, she's an all-time great. Lo Lee is the director of growth design at Zillow. She was on my team at Weblow too. She was our director of growth design and at HubSpot before. Just really, really strong, empathetic leader, really data-driven. And, she's a person that I say like really holds that quality bar. And then Kirsten Malinowski, I think she's at Gusto. I'm still leading growth design. Again, I think Gusto has a very highly respected growth practice as well, too. So I think all of them have different disciplines and aspects of the business. But, for me, those are the 3 I'd love to continue to learn from.
Wow, this is amazing. I hope you will make some introductions. Anyways, amazing leaders and also women. I think we need more of faces here on the Growth Way. And yeah, finally, where people could find you, could stay in touch with you, any sources where it's best to follow you.
Yeah, I think for me, a lot of it's Replit these days. So, if you haven't tried Replit, it's replit.com. And, for me on social, it's just mainly Twitter these days. So it's just my name, David Hoang. And then my website too is davidhoang.com. I've been trying to blog more a little bit too. And of course, you mentioned Proof of Concept, Kate, where I mainly do weekly writing. I kind of think of it as just like an experimental newsletter. So it's like the freshest ideas I have kind of start there. So if you want like raw early thoughts, that's probably the best place to go.
Love it. And of course, the Proof of Concept is like amazing newsletter, and you are keeping the quality bar high, also posting there regularly, which makes me, inspired and keep posted on my Virgin newsletter, which is actually super tough when you have so many things in parallel to find time for that and continue doing that. Thank you very much, David. That was a fantastic conversation. Really enjoyed that. And hopefully it will be valuable for our dear listeners. Thank you for being with us today.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. Thank you for listening. If you found it valuable, you can support Growth Mates by sharing this episode with your friends and colleagues. Subscribe to our show on your favorite platforms and get all episodes to your inbox by subscribing to katesuma.substack.com. Let's keep growing together.